The wind moved across the desert like it had somewhere important to be, carrying dust, old heat, and the faint smell of dry grass. A lone rider watched the land from the ridge, his boots planted firm against loose stones. Beside him stood his horse, ears forward, body tense, as if it sensed something long before its rider did. Below them stretched a town that should not have been there, silent and forgotten, resting under the wide American sky like a memory no one wanted to claim. He had not meant to come this far west. Truth was, he had been following no map and chasing no promise. Days earlier, his horse had begun drifting off the main trail, stubborn in a way it had never been before. At first he thought it was thirst or fatigue, but the animal kept choosing the same direction every morning, pulling toward the empty horizon. A cowboy learns to trust his horse more than his own thoughts, so he stopped fighting it. Now he understood why the animal had been restless. The town looked frozen in time. Wooden buildings leaned under years of sun and neglect. A church steeple rose crookedly above the rooftops, its bell missing. Empty streets cut through the settlement, untouched by wagon tracks or footprints. No smoke climbed from chimneys, no voices carried on the wind. Even the birds avoided it. His horse let out a low breath and stepped forward without waiting for a command. He frowned. The animal was calm, almost certain, walking downhill as if returning home. That feeling settled uneasily in his chest. He had traveled through many abandoned places during his years on the frontier, mining camps left to dust, ranches swallowed by drought, towns emptied after railroads changed direction. But this felt different. This place held weight. The air itself seemed to watch him. As he approached, the silence grew heavier. The usual sounds of leather creaking and hooves striking dirt echoed too loudly between the buildings. A faded sign hung above the first structure they passed, swinging gently though there was barely any wind. The paint had peeled away, leaving only fragments of letters that meant nothing to him. Or at least they should have meant nothing. A strange familiarity tugged at him. He slowed, scanning the street. The layout felt known somehow. The general store on the corner, the hitching posts lined evenly along the road, the way the saloon doors faced west to catch the evening sun. He had never been here before, he was certain of it. Yet something deep inside insisted otherwise. His horse stopped near an old watering trough, dry and cracked. The animal lowered its head as if expecting water to appear. He reached out, running a hand along its neck, feeling the steady warmth beneath dusty hair. "You know this place," he murmured, more to himself than to the horse. The words sounded foolish the moment they left his mouth, but the feeling remained. The horse stamped once, impatient, then turned its head toward the far end of town. There stood a small house separated from the others, its porch half collapsed, windows dark. Unlike the rest, its door hung slightly open. It moved just enough to creak when the wind shifted. A chill worked its way through him despite the heat. He had spent years outrunning his past. The trail gave a man freedom, but it also gave him distance from things better left buried. Memories faded easier when every sunrise brought a new horizon. Still, certain dreams followed him wherever he rode, dreams of firelight against wood walls, raised voices he could never fully hear, a shape standing in a doorway just before everything went dark. He had always woken before seeing the face. His horse began walking again, heading straight toward that lonely house. He pulled gently on the reins, but the animal resisted, not violently, just firmly enough to make a point. The cowboy hesitated, then released the pressure. Dust rose around their feet as they crossed the empty street. Every step felt heavier than the last. The closer he came, the stronger the feeling grew. Not fear exactly, recognition, like hearing a song remembered from childhood, but forgotten for years. A wooden toy lay half buried near the porch steps. He froze when he noticed it, a small carved horse worn smooth by time. He dismounted slowly, boots crunching against gravel, eyes fixed on the object. Without thinking, he bent down and picked it up. His hand trembled. The carving matched one he remembered holding as a boy. Same uneven legs. Same shallow cut along the side where a knife had slipped. He turned it over, and there, barely visible beneath dirt and age, were initials scratched into the wood. His initials, the world seemed to narrow around him, the wind stopped. Even the distant mountains felt closer, pressing in. He looked toward the open doorway of the house. Shadows waited inside, thick and unmoving. Something about that darkness felt personal, as though it had been expecting him for a very long time. A floorboard creaked from within. He lifted his head sharply, no breeze strong enough to move wood. No animals in sight? Just silence returning too quickly. His horse backed away a step, uneasy now, ears pinned slightly. The cowboy swallowed hard and stared into the doorway, the toy still clutched in his hand. Every instinct told him to turn around, mount up, and ride until the town disappeared behind dust and distance. Instead, he took one slow step toward the porch. Because somehow, against reason and memory, he realized one terrifying truth. He had not followed his horse into this ghost town by accident. He had come back. And something inside that house knew exactly who he was. The porch groaned under his weight as he stepped closer to the open doorway. Dust lifted from the wooden boards with each movement, rising into the warm air like breath from something sleeping too long. He paused at the threshold, listening. The silence inside felt thicker than outside, heavy enough to press against his ears. He could hear his own heartbeat, slow and loud, and the faint shifting of leather as his horse moved nervously behind him. The inside of the house smelled of dry wood and old time. Sunlight slipped through broken shutters, laying thin stripes across the floor. A table stood near the wall, one leg shorter than the others, tilted as if someone had left in a hurry. A cracked lantern rested beside it. Everything looked abandoned, yet nothing felt random. Objects sat where hands had last placed them, untouched by years except for dust. He stepped in. The floor creaked again, louder this time, echoing through the empty rooms. His eyes adjusted slowly, taking in small details that stirred something buried deep inside him. A coat hook near the door, a faded rug with a stitched border, a chair positioned near the window facing the street. His chest tightened. He knew this room. Not clearly, not like remembering yesterday, but like recalling a dream that refused to fade. Shapes and feelings returned before full memories could form. He walked toward the table without thinking, his fingers brushing across its surface. A clean streak appeared in the dust where his hand passed. A sudden image flashed in his mind. A smaller hand resting beside his own, laughter echoing softly. The smell of coffee and wood smoke. He pulled back sharply, breathing harder. For years he had told himself his childhood was scattered pieces, nothing worth chasing. He remembered traveling, different towns, different faces, never staying long enough to belong anywhere. The past before his teenage years had always felt foggy, like pages torn from a book. He assumed time had simply taken them. But standing here, the fog felt forced, as if something had pushed those memories away. A sound came from the back room. A faint scrape, quick and soft. His hand moved instinctively toward his belt, though he did not draw anything. He waited, listening. The house returned to silence again, but the feeling of being alone had vanished. Whoever or whatever made that sound was no longer moving. He took a cautious step toward the hallway. The walls narrowed there, lined with framed pictures turned gray from dust. One hung crookly. He reached up and straightened it without thinking, then froze when he saw the photograph beneath the glass. A family stood in front of this very house. The image was faded, faces blurred by time, but the shapes were clear enough. A man with broad shoulders. A woman holding a young boy by the hand. The boy wore a small hat too big for his head. His stomach dropped. The boy's posture felt familiar. The tilt of the shoulders, the way one boot turned slightly outward. He leaned closer, wiping dust from the glass with his sleeve. The face remained unclear, but recognition struck anyway, not through sight but through feeling. He had stood like that once. He stepped back slowly, the room spinning slightly as questions rushed in faster than answers. Why had he never remembered this place? Why did his horse lead him here? And why did the house feel like it had been waiting? Another memory stirred, stronger this time. Nighttime, raised voices behind a closed door. Fear pressing into his chest while he hid somewhere small and dark, a loud crash. Then silence so complete it rang in his ears. He shook his head, trying to steady himself. The hallway ended at a half-open door. Unlike the others, this one showed marks along the wood, deep scratches near the handle. He hesitated before pushing it wider. The hinges protested softly. Inside was a bedroom, smaller than he expected. A narrow bed sat against the wall. A dresser stood nearby, one drawer pulled halfway out. The air felt colder here, untouched by sunlight. His horse suddenly snorted outside, sharp and uneasy. He turned his head toward the window. Through the dusty glass he could see the empty street, unchanged, yet something felt different. The quiet no longer seemed peaceful. It felt watchful. He moved to the dresser and slowly pulled open the drawer. Inside lay folded clothes, preserved by dryness. Beneath them rested a leather-bound journal. The cover cracked as he lifted it, dust falling away. His hands hesitated before opening it. The first pages held simple entries, notes about weather, cattle numbers, supplies brought into town, ordinary ranch life. He flipped forward. The handwriting grew tighter, more hurried. Words pressed harder into the paper. Mentions of trouble, strangers passing through. Arguments with townsfolk. Fear about something coming. He swallowed and turned another page. One entry caught his attention immediately. The ink had smeared slightly, as if written in shaking hands. He read silently, his breathing slowing with each line. The writer spoke about protecting someone, about hiding the truth until the boy was old enough to understand. The boy, a chill spread through him. Before he could read further, a loud bang echoed somewhere outside, sharp enough to rattle the window glass. He snapped the journal shut and moved toward the door. His horse whinnied again, louder this time, pulling against its reins. He stepped onto the porch and scanned the street. Nothing moved. Yet a cloud of dust drifted slowly at the far end of town, rising as if something unseen had just passed through. The air felt heavier, charged with a tension that had not been there before. He looked back at the journal in his hands, then toward the empty buildings surrounding him. For the first time since arriving, a troubling thought settled firmly in his mind. Maybe this ghost town was not abandoned at all, and whatever secrets tied him to this place were only beginning to wake up. The dust at the end of the street slowly settled, but the uneasy feeling stayed. The cowboy stood still on the porch, the journal pressed against his palm, listening for another sound. The town looked empty as before, sun hanging high over silent rooftops, yet something had changed. The stillness no longer felt natural. It felt interrupted. His horse shifted restlessly beside the trough, pulling once more at the reins tied to the post. The animal's eyes followed the same direction where the dust had risen. He trusted that instinct more than his own comfort. Horses noticed things long before people did. He stepped down from the porch and walked toward the middle of the street, boots crunching softly. Every building seemed to lean inward as if watching him pass. The saloon doors creaked faintly, though there was barely any wind. A loose shutter tapped against a wall somewhere behind him, steady and slow like a clock counting down. He opened the journal again while walking, unable to resist the pull of its words. The handwriting grew more urgent in later pages. The writer spoke of disagreements among townsfolk, whispers about hidden money, and strangers arriving with too many questions. Names appeared, crossed out in anger or fear. The entries hinted at betrayal but never fully explained it. One line stood out. The writer feared the truth would follow the boy one day. He stopped walking. The words felt directed at him, even though decades must have passed since they were written. He flipped backward, searching for earlier entries, hoping for clarity. Instead, he found smaller details that made his chest tighten. Notes about teaching the boy to ride. Mentions of carving toys to keep him busy during long winters. Worries about keeping him safe from something unnamed. A memory flickered again, stronger this time. He was small, sitting on wooden steps, holding a carving knife too big for his hand while someone guided his grip. A deep voice laughed softly, patient and warm. The image vanished before he could see the face clearly, leaving only the feeling of safety. He closed the journal slowly. If this house had once been his home, then someone had erased it from his life completely. That thought carried more weight than fear. It meant choices had been made without him. Someone decided he should forget. A distant metallic clang echoed through town. He turned sharply toward the sound. It came from near the old blacksmith shop at the far end of the street. The door there hung open, darkness stretching inside like a shadow refusing sunlight. He hesitated, then began walking toward it. With each step, small details caught his attention. Fresh marks in the dust that were not his own. A boot print near the boardwalk, partly smudged but recent enough to notice. The town was not as empty as it appeared. His mind raced through possibilities. Travelers passing through, someone hiding, or someone who never left. As he approached the blacksmith shop, the temperature seemed to drop slightly. The scent of rust and old iron lingered in the air. Tools hung along the walls inside, frozen in place as if waiting for work to resume. A hammer lay on the ground near the anvil. He crouched beside it. The metal felt warm. He pulled his hand back quickly. Someone had been here recently? A quiet movement came from behind him. He turned fast, heart pounding, but saw only the empty street stretching back toward the house. Still, he felt watched again, the sensation crawling along his shoulders. His thoughts drifted to another possibility he had avoided. What if the town was not abandoned because of time alone? What if something happened here that people chose not to speak about? Frontier towns disappeared for many reasons: drought, disease, violence, secrets buried deeper than graves. He stood and looked toward the hills surrounding the town. From this angle, the place felt trapped, enclosed by land that offered no easy escape. Anyone living here would have known every path in and out. Another memory pushed forward, sharper than before. Running through a street at night, flames reflecting in windows, someone shouting his name, hands lifting him onto a horse while chaos unfolded behind him. He staggered slightly as the memory faded. So he had left suddenly, taken away, but by whom? And why had no one ever told him? The journal weighed heavily in his hand again. Somewhere inside it might be answers, yet reading it here felt dangerous, like uncovering truths too quickly. He glanced around once more before heading back toward the small house. Halfway there, he noticed something new. The toy horse he had picked up earlier was no longer where he remembered setting it on the porch railing. He stopped cold. The porch stood empty except for drifting dust and broken boards. He scanned the ground, expecting it to have fallen, but it was nowhere nearby. A slow realization settled over him. He was not alone in this ghost town. Someone else had touched that toy. His horse suddenly jerked its head toward the church at the center of town, ears pinned back. A low growl rumbled in its throat, something he had never heard from the animal before. The church doors stood closed, but one of them moved slightly, opening just enough to reveal darkness inside. He stared at it, pulse steady but heavy. The journal spoke of fear spreading through the town before everything ended, of people turning against each other, of secrets protected at all costs. If someone remained here now, they might know exactly what happened all those years ago. Or they might be the reason those memories were taken from him in the first place. The wind picked up suddenly, sweeping dust along the street and carrying a faint sound from the church. Not a voice, not quite a movement, but something close enough to make his skin tighten. He took one step forward, unable to stop himself. Because whatever waited inside that building was tied to his past. And the closer he came to the truth, the more it felt like the town itself was deciding whether he was meant to remember at all. The church door moved again, slow enough that he almost believed it was the wind. The sound of wood scraping against stone carried across the empty street. His horse backed away, rope pulling tight against the post, muscles tense as if ready to bolt. The cowboy stood still, watching the narrow opening grow wider, revealing nothing but shadow inside. He told himself to think clearly. Ghost towns played tricks on a man's mind. Silence stretched thoughts in strange directions. Yet the missing toy horse, the warm hammer in the blacksmith shop, and the fresh prints in the dust left little room for doubt. Someone was here, moving just out of sight. He stepped forward carefully, boots slow against the dirt. Every sound seemed louder now. The wind brushed along buildings, lifting loose boards and sending faint echoes through the town. The church stood at the center like the heart of everything, old and stubborn, refusing to collapse even after years of abandonment. As he approached, memories pressed harder against him. Bells ringing in the morning light. People gathered outside in clean clothes. A smaller version of himself running between legs while adults talked in serious voices. The images came in fragments, but they felt real enough to slow his breathing. He reached the steps and paused. The air felt colder here. A faint smell of candle wax lingered, impossible after so many years. He placed one hand against the door and pushed it open wider. Inside, dust floated through thin beams of sunlight cutting from broken windows. Wooden pews lined the room, some tipped over, others still perfectly straight. At the front stood a simple pulpit, untouched except for a layer of gray settling over everything. He listened. For a moment there was nothing. Then came a soft footstep behind him. He turned quickly, but the doorway stood empty. Outside, the street remained still. His horse watched him, ears forward again, uneasy but quiet. The feeling returned stronger than before, the certainty that eyes followed his every move. He stepped farther inside the church. Floorboards creaked beneath him, echoing upward toward the high ceiling. He noticed marks carved faintly into the wood of one pew, lines scratched by a small hand passing time. Without thinking, he traced them with his fingers. Another memory surfaced. Sitting beside someone during a long sermon, carving shapes while trying not to laugh. A gentle hand resting on his shoulder to keep him still. He closed his eyes briefly, letting the feeling settle. Whoever had raised him here had cared for him. That much was clear now, which made the disappearance of this town even more troubling. A sudden thud came from behind the pulpit. He opened his eyes and stared forward. The sound had weight, like something dropped or shifted deliberately. He moved slowly down the aisle, each step measured. His pulse quickened, but curiosity pushed him onward stronger than fear. When he reached the front, he noticed a narrow door behind the pulpit slightly open. Darkness waited beyond it. He hesitated only a second before stepping closer. The journal's words echoed in his mind. Fear spreading, secrets hidden, protecting the boy. Everything seemed to lead here, to this building and whatever lay beyond that door. He pushed it open. A narrow staircase descended into a cellar beneath the church. Cool air drifted upward, carrying the scent of earth and old wood. The steps were worn from use, not decay. Someone had walked here often once. He glanced back toward the entrance of the church. Sunlight framed the doorway, bright and distant. For a brief moment, leaving felt easier. He could mount his horse, ride away, and never learn what waited below. But the carved toy, the journal, and the returning memories left him no peace in turning back. He began descending. Each step creaked softly, the sound swallowed quickly by the underground space. The cellar opened into a low room supported by thick beams. Shelves lined the walls, filled with boxes and covered shapes. Lantern hooks hung overhead, empty now. At the center stood a table. On it lay scattered papers, newer than anything else he had seen in town. Dust barely touched them. Someone had been here recently, studying these records. He approached slowly. The papers contained maps of the surrounding land, notes written in different handwriting than the journal. Dates appeared that were far more recent than he expected. Whoever stayed here had been tracking something or someone. His breath slowed as realization crept in. This ghost town had not simply been abandoned, it had been watched. A faint shuffle came from the far corner of the cellar. He turned sharply. A shadow shifted behind stacked crates, not large, not threatening, but unmistakably human. The figure remained still, hidden just enough to avoid clear sight. Neither moved for several seconds. He felt no immediate danger, only tension thick enough to make his hands tremble slightly. Questions crowded his mind, but words refused to come easily. Finally he spoke, voice steady but cautious. "I know someone's here." Silence answered him. Then a slow breath echoed from the darkness. The figure stepped forward just enough for light to touch the edge of a worn boot. His heart pounded harder than it had all day. Whoever stood there knew this place. Knew the cellar. Maybe knew the truth buried inside his lost memories. Above them, the church door slammed shut suddenly, the sound crashing through the building like thunder. Dust fell from the ceiling beams, and his horse whinnied loudly outside. The cowboy did not look away from the shadow, because in that moment he understood something important. The answers he had chased across years of open land were finally within reach. And whatever happened next would decide whether this ghost town remained a place of loss or became the beginning of something he had, unknowingly, been searching for his entire life. The figure stepped forward slowly, hands visible, movements careful as if approaching a frightened animal. Lantern light from above barely reached the cellar, but it was enough for the cowboy to see an older man emerge from the shadows. His hair had turned gray long ago, his face lined by years spent under sun and worry. Dust clung to his coat, yet his eyes were clear and steady. For a long moment neither of them spoke. The cowboy felt something strange settle inside him, not fear, not anger, but recognition without memory. The man studied him the same way, searching his face as though confirming something long hoped for. "I wondered if you'd ever come back," the older man said quietly. The words landed heavily, not surprise, not confusion, expectation. "You know me," the cowboy replied. The man nodded once. "I was hoping you'd remember on your own." Silence stretched again, filled only by the faint creak of wood above them. The cowboy held up the journal. "This belonged to someone who tried to protect a boy. That boy was me, wasn't it?" Another nod. The older man's eyes softened. "Your family lived here. This was your home before the town fell apart." The cowboy felt the truth settle into place like a missing piece finally found. The memories that had haunted him began connecting. The house, the church, the carved toy horse. "What happened here?" he asked. The man exhaled slowly, as if releasing a story carried too long. He explained how the town had once been a peaceful frontier settlement, built by ranchers and families chasing honest work. But prosperity brought outsiders who searched for hidden wealth rumored beneath nearby land. Arguments grew. Trust broke. Neighbors turned suspicious of one another. Fear spread faster than reason. Your father discovered that some men planned to take control of the town by driving families away through threats and destruction. Rather than fight and risk innocent lives, he chose another path. One night, he secretly helped families leave before things grew worse. Fires were set to make the town appear abandoned, convincing troublemakers there was nothing left worth claiming. "You were taken away before it happened," the man continued gently. "Your father asked me to ride you out. Said you deserved a life free from the fear that was coming." The cowboy's throat tightened. "And my parents?" "They stayed behind long enough to make sure everyone escaped safely. After that, folks scattered west and north. The town faded into legend. Your father believed forgetting would keep you safe." The missing years suddenly made sense. The broken memories were not accidents, they were protection. "You watched this place all this time," the cowboy said, glancing at the papers on the table. The man gave a faint smile. "Someone had to. Your father asked me to return now and then. Make sure no one disturbed what was left. I stayed longer than planned, I suppose." Hard to leave a place filled with memories. The cowboy felt emotion rise unexpectedly. He had spent years drifting from trail to trail, believing he had no roots. Yet this ghost town had held his story all along. Outside, sunlight shifted through the church windows, warming the cellar slightly. The tension that had followed him since arriving began to ease. The town no longer felt watchful or threatening, it felt patient. "Why did my horse bring me here?" he asked quietly. The older man chuckled softly. "That horse belonged to your family line, raised from the same stock your father trusted. Animals remember paths better than people do," the cowboy smiled faintly, understanding at last why the animal had refused to change direction. They walked back up the stairs together. When the church door opened again, warm desert light poured inside, chasing away the shadows. Outside, the town looked different now. Still empty, still worn by time, but no longer haunting. It felt peaceful. He walked slowly through the street, seeing it with new eyes. The saloon where laughter once lived. The general store that fed families through harsh winters. The small house that had been his beginning. Each building carried stories rather than ghosts. At the porch, he noticed the carved toy horse resting carefully on the railing cleaned of dust. The older man must have moved it earlier, returning it without words. He picked it up and turned it over in his hand, feeling a connection finally complete. For the first time in years, the restless feeling inside him faded. "What happens to this place now?" he asked. "That depends on you," the man replied. "It was never meant to stay forgotten forever." The cowboy looked across the town, imagining repaired roofs, smoke rising from chimneys again, travelers stopping along the trail. The past no longer felt like something chasing him. It felt like something offering direction. He tied his horse near the house and began clearing debris from the porch without thinking. The simple act felt right. Honest work under open sky. The older man watched with a quiet smile before joining him. As the sun lowered behind the mountains, golden light spread across the ghost town, turning weathered wood warm again. The wind carried new sounds now, footsteps, movement, life returning slowly where silence once ruled. The cowboy realized he had not been led here to face fear, but to reclaim belonging. The journey across lonely trails had not been escape. It had been a long road back home. He placed the carved horse inside his pocket and looked toward the horizon one last time. The open frontier still called to him, but it no longer felt empty. Some roads are meant for wandering. Others are meant to bring a person back to where their story truly begins. And as evening settled over the town, the ghost of his past finally became the foundation of his future, leaving him with peace, purpose, and a place that was no longer a ghost town at all.